stone walls of Grant Hall absorbed sound like a tomb. 15 degrees outside, colder inside. Garrett Aldrich stood alone on the marble floor, his breath forming small clouds in the candlelit chamber. Above him, 6 officers sat behind a long oak table elevated on a stone platform. Their faces were shadows. Their uniforms were darkness interrupted only by the dull gleam of brass buttons and the sharper glint of medals earned in blood. In the center sat his father, General Hadrian Aldrich, 58 years old, hero of Antietam, survivor of a war that had ended 11 years ago but still lived in the scars crossing his hands, the stiffness in his left shoulder, the way his jaw clenched when he thought no one was watching. The general's eyes held no warmth, no recognition that the young man standing below him had once been a boy who waited by windows for a father who rarely came home. Commandant Thaddeus Brennan spoke first. His voice carried the weight of authority earned through 30 years of service, tempered by something softer, something that might have been regret. Cadet Captain Aldrich, you have been asked 3 times to answer a simple question. I will ask once more, and your answer will be entered into the permanent record of this institution. Garrett's hands were steady at his sides. His uniform was perfect, every button fastened, every crease sharp enough to draw blood. His spine was iron, but his throat was dry as bone. The question, Brennan continued, is this: did you knowingly provide aid and protection to a cadet who violated the honor code of the United States Military Academy? The 6 officers waited. 100 cadets packed into the gallery behind Garrett waited. The stone walls waited. His father's expression never changed. Garrett opened his mouth. The words that would end his career before it began sat on his tongue like poison. But before they could escape, the scene fractured, shattered, fell away like ice breaking on the Hudson River, Washington. December 1875. The Aldrich family home sat 3 blocks from the War Department, a Georgian brick structure that had witnessed the entire Civil War from its windows. Inside, the rooms were exactly as they had been since 1860. Dark wood, darker memories. Portraits of dead relatives staring down from walls that had absorbed too many arguments, too many silences, too many departures that became permanent. Garrett stood in the dining room, 22 years old and feeling 12. His father sat at the head of the table. Same chair he'd occupied for 30 years. Same way of cutting his meat into precise squares. Same silence that made the scrape of silverware against porcelain sound like screams. Between them, an empty chair. Donovan's chair. 10 years empty. Would be empty forever. But neither man suggested removing it. Some ghost demanded their seat at the table. You graduate in 6 months, Hadrian said. Not a question. A statement of fact delivered with the same tone he might use to comment on the weather or the approach of enemy artillery. Yes, sir. Ranked 3rd in your class. Yes, sir. The knife paused in its work. Hadrian's eyes lifted, gray as gunmetal, hard as the metals pinned to his dress uniform, which he wore even at home, even at dinner, even on Christmas Eve. 3rd, he repeated, not 1st. Garrett knew better than to offer excuses. His father had no use for explanations that began with "I tried" or "it was difficult." The general dealt in results, outcomes, success or failure with nothing in between. The top cadet receives his choice of assignment, Hadrian continued. 2nd receives favorable consideration. 3rd receives what's left after the real officers have chosen. I understand, sir. Do you? The question hung in the air like the smoke from the candles guttering in their holders. The dining room was cold. The whole house was cold. Had been cold since the telegram arrived in April 1865. Since a War Department courier had knocked on the door with news that First Lieutenant Donovan Aldrich had fallen at Appomattox. Since Hadrian had read the words without expression, folded the paper with hands that didn't shake, and said only he died following orders, as an officer should. Garrett had been 12. He remembered his mother's scream, remembered his father's silence, remembered deciding somewhere in the hollow space where his heart used to beat that he would never give his father reason to send another telegram, never give him another son to bury. He would be perfect, safe, alive, even if it meant being 3rd instead of 1st. You've been accepted into the cadet officer program, Hadrian said. You'll serve as cadet captain for the spring semester, a position of responsibility. Yes, sir, I'm honored. Don't be, it's a test. The academy is watching to see if you can lead men or if you're simply good at following orders someone else gives. Garrett said nothing. There was nothing to say. His father's assessments were never wrong, only brutal. Hadrian set down his knife and fork. The meal was half finished, but the general never ate more than he needed. Waste was weakness. Comfort was corruption. After graduation, you'll receive your commission as second lieutenant. I've arranged an assignment with the War Department. Staff position, strategic planning, safe, clean. You'll work with men who fight wars with maps and telegrams instead of rifles and bayonets. Something cold and sharp twisted in Garrett's chest. Father, I was hoping for a field assignment. Cavalry or dictator? No. The word hit like a door slamming. Final. Absolute. Sir, I've trained for combat. 4 years of tactics, horsemanship, artillery. And you'll use that training to help other men fight. You will not throw your life away charging into battles that don't need you. You will not end up in the ground next to your brother. There it was, the truth they never spoke but always carried, the weight of Donovan's ghost. Hadrian stood. The meal was over. Conversations in the Aldrich house ended when the general decided they ended. You are all I have left, he said. His voice was quieter now, not softer. Never soft, but lower. Tight. I lost one son because I taught him duty before survival. I will not lose another. He walked to the door, paused with his hand on the frame. You'll take the War Department position. You'll serve your country from behind a desk. And you'll live to see 40. That is an order, Cadet Captain. The door closed behind him. Garrett sat alone at the table. The candles burned lower. Outside, Washington prepared for Christmas. Inside, the empty chair waited for a brother who would never come home. He looked up at the portrait on the wall. Donovan in his dress uniform, 21 years old forever, smiling like he knew something the rest of them didn't. Maybe he had known. Maybe he'd understood that some men were born to die young and famous, while others were born to live long and forgotten. Garrett blew out the candles and climbed the stairs to his childhood room. On the desk, wrapped in oilcloth, sat a daguerreotype. 2 boys, 112, 122, the older with his hand on the younger shoulder. Both in civilian clothes taken the day before Donovan left for West Point. Under the image written in his brother's hand, make father proud. Live free. Don't let his fear become your cage. Garrett traced the words with one finger. Then he packed his bags for the return to New York. The Hudson River was starting to freeze. Garrett stood on the plain watching ice form along the banks, listening to the crack and groan of water becoming solid. The military academy sprawled behind him, gray stone buildings that had produced more generals than any institution in America. The place felt like a fortress, looked like a prison, operated like a machine designed to turn boys into officers and officers into instruments of national will. He'd spent 4 years here, knew every building, every tradition, every rule written and unwritten. In 6 months he would graduate, receive his commission, put on the gold bars of a second lieutenant, and spend the rest of his life shuffling papers in Washington while other men fought wars. The thought tasted like ash. Beautiful morning for contemplating failure. Garrett turned. Lieutenant Colonel Silas Merrick stood 5 feet away, breath steaming in the December air. 37 years old, but looked 50. Face weathered by sun and wind and whatever he'd seen during Sherman's march to the sea. A scar ran from his left eyebrow to his hairline. His right leg dragged slightly when he walked legacy of a Confederate bayonet at Kennesaw Mountain. Not contemplating failure, sir. Just winter. Same thing at West Point. Merrick moved to stand beside him. They watched the river together. In the distance, cadet formations drilled on the frozen parade ground. The sound of sergeants shouting corrections carried on the wind. You're wanted at Grant Hall, Merrick said. Commandant Brennan needs to see you. Did he say why? No, but he looked troubled, which means you should be concerned. They walked together across the plain. The wind cut through their uniforms like blades. January in New York was a special kind of cold. The kind that found every gap in clothing, every weakness in resolve. How was Washington? Merrick asked. Cold. I meant your father. Also cold. Merrick nodded. He'd served under Hadrian during the war. Knew the general's reputation, his methods. His absolute refusal to accept anything less than perfection from the men under his command, including his sons. He's trying to protect you, Merrick said. I know. Doesn't make it easier. No, sir, it doesn't. They reached Grant Hall, the massive Gothic structure that served as West Point's administrative heart. Stone walls 3 feet thick, windows like cathedral glass, a building designed to make young men feel small and the institution feel eternal. Inside, the temperature dropped another 10 degrees. Commandant Thaddeus Brennan's office occupied the 2nd floor. The door was already open. Brennan sat behind a desk covered in papers, maps, and reports. 38 years old, thin, precise. Everything about him, sharp angles and calculated movements. A scar ran down his right cheek from temple to jaw, gift from a Confederate saber at Gettysburg. He looked up as Garrett entered. "Close the door. Sit." Garrett obeyed. The chair was hardwood, uncomfortable by design. Nothing in this office invited relaxation. Brennan studied him for a long moment. Outside, the wind rattled windows that had stood since 1820. "How much do you believe in the honor code?" Brennan asked finally. The question was strange, unexpected. "I believe in it completely, sir." "Why?" "Because without it, we're just men with weapons. The code makes us officers." Brennan's expression didn't change, but something in his eyes shifted. Approval, maybe, or recognition. "A cadet will not lie, cheat, steal, or tolerate those who do," Brennan recited. 4 prohibitions. Simple words. But they've destroyed more careers than enemy bullets. "Do you know why?" "Because honor is harder than courage, sir." "Exactly." Brennan stood, walked to the window, looked out at the frozen river. "Courage is simple. See enemy. Charge enemy. Live birdie. Honor is complex. See violation. Report violation. Watch a classmate expelled. Live with that choice forever." He turned back to Garrett. "I'm assigning you to investigate a potential honor code violation. 2 cadets. Evidence of academic dishonesty during last week's engineering examination. Their answers were identical. Not similar. Identical, including the same incorrect calculations." Garrett's stomach tightened. Academic violations meant expulsion. No trial, no second chances. The honor code was absolute. "Who are the cadets, sir?" "Thomas Whitmore, first class, son of Senator Alistair Whitmore, chairman of the Senate Military Appropriations Committee, the man who decides how much money this institution receives." Silence. "And the second cadet?" "Jonathan Hayes, third class, scholarship student. Parents are farmers in Ohio. He's here because he's brilliant, not because he's connected." Brennan returned to his desk, pulled out 2 examination papers, slid them across to Garrett. The answers were identical. Same handwriting, same mistakes. Impossible to explain as coincidence. "You have 1 week to investigate and report findings," Brennan said. "Conduct interviews. Gather evidence. Determine what happened and who is responsible. Then you will present your conclusions to me and I will decide what action to take." "Understood, sir." Garrett stood to leave. "Cadet Captain." He stopped. Brennan's face was unreadable. "Your father was the best officer I ever served under. Brilliant strategist, completely fearless in battle. But he had one flaw. Sir, he believed the rules existed to protect the institution. I believe the rules exist to protect the truth. Remember that difference. It may matter." The investigation took 2 days. 2 days of comparing exam papers, checking dates, reviewing seating charts from the examination hall, interviewing other cadets who might have witnessed suspicious behavior. Every piece of evidence pointed to the same conclusion. Thomas Whitmore and Jonathan Hayes had cheated. But how? And more importantly, why Garrett sat in his room on the night of January 5th, spreading papers across his desk. Outside, wind howled through the barracks. The radiator clanked and hissed, fighting a losing battle against the cold. He'd interviewed Whitmore first. The young man had been exactly what Garrett expected. 21 years old, handsome in the way of people who'd never worried about anything more serious than which horse to ride or which girl to court. His uniform was immaculate. His manner was confident. His responses were smooth as silk and twice as empty. Similar answers, Whitmore had said, his face the picture of innocent confusion. "Captain, there were 40 of us in that examination. In a room that size, perhaps Hayes and I studied from the same textbook, used the same formulas, arrived at the same conclusions through legitimate means, including the same incorrect conclusions. Math is difficult for some of us. I never claimed to be an engineer. But you passed the examination, through hard work and preparation. Nothing more." The interview had been useless. Whitmore was too practiced, too smooth. He'd been deflecting accusations his entire life. Hayes had been different. The young man had arrived at Garrett's room shaking, not from cold, from fear. 20 years old, thin, dark circles under eyes that hadn't seen sleep in days. His uniform was regulation, but the jacket hung loose on a frame that had lost weight recently. "Sit down," Garrett had said. Hayes sat, stared at his hands. "I need you to tell me what happened during the engineering examination on December 20th. Silence. "Cadet Hayes, I've seen the evidence. Your answers are identical to Whitmore's answers. Not similar. Identical. I need to understand how that happened." More silence. Then so quietly, Garrett almost missed it. "I didn't want to do it." The words hung in the air between them. Do what? Hayes looked up. His eyes were red. His voice was breaking. I didn't want to cheat. I swear on my mother's grave, Captain, I never wanted any of this. But I had no choice. He said he'd ruin me. Said he'd report me for financial dishonesty. Said my family would be shamed, that I'd be expelled anyway. So what difference did it make? Who said that? But Garrett already knew. Whitmore, Hayes whispered. Thomas Whitmore. The full story came out slowly, painfully, like extracting a bullet without whiskey. Hayes's father had died during Hayes's first year at West Point. Heart failure. Left the family farm in debt. Left Hayes's mother trying to feed 3 younger siblings on income that barely covered seed for next year's planting. Hayes had needed money, books, uniforms, equipment. The academy provided tuition, but cadets were expected to cover their own expenses. Most came from families wealthy enough to absorb the cost. Hayes did not. Thomas Whitmore had approached him in October. Friendly, generous, offering a loan. $200, no interest. Just one cadet helping another. Hayes had accepted. Grateful. Relieved. The trap had closed in December. Whitmore had come to Hayes's room the night before the engineering examination. His manner had changed. Friendly became cold. Generous became calculating. I need help with tomorrow's exam, Whitmore had said. You're going to give me your answers. Hayes had refused. Whitmore had smiled. That's unfortunate because I was going to forgive your debt. But now I think I'll report it to the commandant. Financial dishonesty. Borrowing money under false pretenses. You'll be expelled. Your mother will lose the farm trying to pay me back. Your siblings will starve, all because you were too proud to help a friend. Hayes had stared at him, understanding for the first time that he'd been marked as prey from the beginning. What do you want me to do? Whitmore had laid out the plan. Hayes would complete his examination honestly. Then he would allow Whitmore to copy his answers. Simple, clean, both would pass, the debt would be forgiven. No one would ever know. Except Hayes knew, and the knowledge was killing him. Garrett sat in his room reading Hayes' statement for the 3rd time. The case was clear. Whitmore had coerced Hayes into cheating. Both had violated the honor code. Both should be expelled. But Garrett knew what would happen if he reported this. Hayes would be thrown out. A poor kid from Ohio who'd made one mistake under impossible pressure. His career destroyed. His family's sacrifice wasted. Whitmore would be thrown out. A senator's son, a young man connected to the highest levels of power in Washington. His father would be furious, vindictive, and West Point would suffer. Garrett wasn't naive. He understood how institutions worked, how money and power flowed through channels invisible to idealists and innocents. Senator Alistair Whitmore controlled military appropriations, controlled funding for academies and armories, and everything that kept the Army functioning. If his son was expelled, what would the senator do? The answer was obvious. He would punish West Point, cut funding, make an example, show everyone what happened when you humiliated powerful people. Other cadets would pay the price. Scholarship students like Hayes, young men whose only crime was being born poor and trying to rise through merit. Garrett stood, paced his small room. The walls felt closer with each lap. Outside, bells rang for evening formation. He had a choice to make. Report the truth and watch innocent cadets suffer while Whitmore's father destroyed careers and budgets. Or bury the evidence. Let both young men graduate. Preserve the institution at the cost of his own integrity. His father would tell him to bury it. Protect the larger mission. Sacrifice the small truth for the greater good. That was strategy. That was leadership. But Donovan's voice whispered from the photograph on his desk. Don't let his fear become your cage. Garrett looked at the evidence spread across his desk. Then he put on his coat and walked through the freezing night to Commandant Brennan's quarters. Some cages once entered could never be escaped. But he could choose not to lock the door himself. Brennan's office was warmer than the barracks. A fire burned in the stone fireplace. Shadows danced on walls decorated with maps from battles 10 years dead. The commandant sat behind his desk reading Garrett's report. His face revealed nothing. The scar on his cheek caught firelight and threw it back in pieces. Finally, he set the papers down. This is thorough, complete. You've done excellent work. Thank you, sir. It's also going to cause a tremendous problem. Garrett said nothing. Brennan stood, walked to a cabinet, pulled out a bottle of whiskey and 2 glasses, poured 2 fingers in each, handed one to Garrett. Technically, I shouldn't drink with cadets, but tonight I think we need to speak off the record. Man to man, not officer to subordinate. They sat in chairs near the fire. The whiskey was good, smooth. The kind of liquor that costs more than most cadets made in a year. Do you know who Senator Whitmore is? Brennan asked. I know he controls military appropriations, sir. He controls more than that. He's the most powerful man on Capitol Hill when it comes to armed forces. A word from him can make or break careers, institutions. He's kept West Point funded through tight budget years. He's pushed through expansion programs, new facilities, faculty positions. Brennan swirled his whiskey, watching firelight play through the amber liquid. He's also a vindictive son of a bitch who never forgets a slight. The fire crackled. Outside, wind rattled the windows. If we expel his son, he will destroy us. Not immediately, not obviously, but over time, through budget cuts and delayed appropriations, and 1,000 small bureaucratic cruelties, he will make West Point pay. Sir, with respect, that can't be our concern. The honor code? The honor code serves the institution, and the institution must survive to serve the honor code. Do you see the paradox? Garrett did, and it made him sick. What are you saying, sir? Brennan finished his whiskey, set the glass down with careful precision. I'm saying that I don't have the authority to decide this. The stakes are too high. The consequence is too severe. This decision must come from someone with more rank, more perspective. Who? Your father. The room temperature dropped 10 degrees. Sir, General Aldrich is arriving tomorrow. I telegraphed him this afternoon, explained the situation. He'll be here by evening. He'll review your investigation, and he'll make the final decision on how we proceed. Garrett's hands clenched on the arms of his chair. My father works for the War Department. He has no authority over Academy disciplinary matters. No, but he has extensive experience with delicate situations, political complications. He understands how to navigate waters where honor and pragmatism meet, where ideals crash against reality. Brennan leaned forward. His eyes were gray as winter sky. I know you and your father have a complicated relationship. I know he wants you safe, protected. I know you feel suffocated by his concern. How do you? Because I served under him. I watched him after your brother died. I saw what losing Donovan did to him, how it changed him, made him harder, more cautious, more willing to sacrifice anything to protect what he had left. Brennan's voice was quiet now, almost gentle. He loves you, Garrett, in his way. And that love has made him dangerous. To himself, to you, to anyone who threatens the future he's trying to build for you. I didn't ask for his protection. No, but you have it anyway. Tomorrow when he arrives, he will read your report, and he will tell you to bury it, to drop this investigation, to let both cadets graduate and pretend none of this ever happened. And if I refuse, Brennan smiled, sad, tired, then you'll learn what I learned during the war, that sometimes doing the right thing costs more than you can afford to pay. He stood, walked to the window, looked out at the frozen academy grounds. Go back to your quarters, get some sleep. Tomorrow will be difficult enough without starting it exhausted. Garrett stood, moved toward the door, stopped with his hand on the frame. Sir, what would you do if you were in my position? Brennan didn't turn from the window. I'd do what I did at Chancellorsville, follow my orders, save as many men as I could, and spend the rest of my life wondering if I was a coward or a pragmatist. Which were you? I don't know, I'm still wondering. Garrett walked back through the frozen night. The wind had died. The temperature had dropped. Ice formed on every surface, turning the world into crystal and shadow. He climbed the stairs to his room, lit the oil lamp, sat at his desk. On the wall, Donovan's photograph watched him with eyes that had never learned compromise. Garrett pulled out paper and pen. If his father was coming, if decisions were being made about his future without his consent, then he needed to make his own position clear. He wrote until midnight, crossed out, rewrote, refined. The final letter was short, direct. Father, by the time you read this, you will have reviewed my investigation. You will know that 2 cadets violated the honor code, one through greed, one through desperation. I know what you will tell me to do. You will say that expelling them both will hurt the institution, that Senator Whitmore will seek revenge, that innocent cadets will suffer for my rigidity. You will be right, but you will also be wrong, because if we compromise honor to protect the institution, we destroy the only thing that makes the institution worth protecting. Donovan died following orders. I understand that now. I understand why you blame yourself, why you've spent 11 years trying to keep me safe, trying to make sure I never face the choice he faced. But I'm facing that choice anyway. Not on a battlefield. Here, in the decision between what's convenient and what's correct. I'm not Donovan. I won't die young charging enemy lines. But I also won't live old knowing I betrayed everything he believed in. Tomorrow I will present my findings. I will recommend expulsion for both cadets with consideration for Hayes due to coercion. I will accept whatever consequences follow. Not to defy you, but to honor the man who taught me that duty comes before comfort. Your son, Garrett. He folded the letter, sealed it, left it on his desk where his father would find it tomorrow. Then he lay down on his bunk, stared at the ceiling, listened to ice forming on the windows. Sleep didn't come. Outside, the Hudson River froze solid, and somewhere in Washington, his father was packing his bags for a journey north, preparing to save a son who didn't want to be saved, to protect a future that felt more like a prison with every passing day. The stone walls of West Point had stood for 56 years. They would stand for 100 more. But some foundations once cracked could never be fully repaired. Garrett closed his eyes. Tomorrow would bring his father, bring confrontation, bring the moment when he would have to choose between the path of safety and the path of honor. He already knew which one he would take. The only question was whether he could survive the choice. The telegram arrived at dawn. Garrett was already awake, had been awake for hours, watching gray light creep across his room like an unwelcome confession. Outside, bugles called cadets to formation. Boots thundered on frozen ground. The machine of West Point grinding forward with the same relentless precision it had maintained since 1802. A knock on his door. Enter? Cadet Malcolm Hendricks stepped inside, Hayes's roommate. A quiet young man from Pennsylvania with nervous hands and eyes that never quite met anyone's gaze. Captain Aldrich, sir. Commandant Brennan requests your presence, immediately. Thank you, Hendricks. The young man hesitated. Sir, is it true about Hayes and Whitmore? Word had spread. Of course it had. In a place like West Point, secrets lasted about as long as snow in July. I can't discuss an ongoing investigation. Hayes hasn't eaten in 3 days, sir. Hasn't slept. He just sits on his bunk, staring at the wall. I'm worried about him. Garrett looked at Hendricks properly, saw genuine concern there, friendship that ran deeper than fear of association with scandal. Stay with him. Don't let him be alone. Understood? Yes, sir. Hendricks left. Garrett dressed quickly, splashed icy water on his face from the basin by his window. The shock helped, cleared his head, prepared him for what was coming. He reached for his coat, stopped. On his desk, the letter to his father sat where he'd left it, sealed, waiting. For a moment, Garrett considered tearing it up, starting over, writing something softer, more diplomatic, the kind of careful language that might preserve their relationship while still maintaining his position. But Donovan's photograph watched from the wall with eyes that demanded truth over comfort. Garrett left the letter where it was. Brennan's office was crowded. The commandant sat behind his desk. Lieutenant Colonel Silas Merrick stood by the window, his scarred face unreadable. And in the chair where Garrett had sat 2 nights ago, a third figure occupied space like a force of nature. General Hadrian Aldrich. He wore his full dress uniform, every medal earned, every ribbon placed with geometric precision. His gray hair was cut military short. His jaw was clean-shaven. His eyes were the color of winter storms over the Atlantic. He looked at Garrett the way a surgeon might look at a patient before amputation. Necessary, regrettable, inevitable. Cadet Captain Aldrich, reporting as ordered, sir. Brennan gestured to a chair against the wall, not at the desk, not in the circle of power, against the wall like a witness or a defendant. Garrett sat. Your father arrived an hour ago, Brennan said. I've briefed him on the situation. He's reviewed your investigation report. Hadrian's face revealed nothing. The evidence is thorough, the general said. His voice was granite. Conclusive. Both cadets violated the honor code. Under standard procedure, both should be expelled. Relief flooded through Garrett. His father agreed, saw the truth. Would support, however. The word landed like a cannonball. However, I've also reviewed the broader context. Senator Whitmore's position, his control over military appropriations, the potential consequences of expelling his son. Hadrian stood. Walked to the map on Brennan's wall, a detailed survey of the Hudson Valley. West Point marked with a star. This institution educates approximately 300 cadets per year. Of those, perhaps 50 are scholarship students from families without financial means. Young men who represent our nation's commitment to merit over birth, to ability over wealth. He turned to face Garrett. Senator Whitmore controls a budget of $12 million annually. Appropriations that fund this academy, that pay for those 50 scholarships, that maintain facilities, compensate faculty, purchase equipment. Sir, I understand the financial implications. You understand nothing. The words were cold, final. You see 2 cadets in an honor code violation. I see 300 cadets who will suffer if we make the wrong choice. I see an institution that has produced every general worth remembering in American history. I see a mission larger than 2 young men and their mistakes. Hadrian moved closer, stood directly in front of Garrett. As of this moment, you are hereby ordered to cease all investigation activities related to Cadets Whitmore and Hayes. You will destroy your evidence. You will make no report to any official body. This matter is closed. The room went silent. Outside, cadets marched. Sergeants shouted. The world continued turning because the world didn't care about honor when survival was at stake. No, the word came out before Garrett could stop it. Quiet, but absolute. Hadrian's expression didn't change, but something dangerous flickered behind his eyes. Repeat that, cadet. No, sir, I will not destroy evidence. I will not bury this investigation. The honor code is clear. Both cadets violated it. Both must face consequences. Even if those consequences destroy this institution, the institution isn't worth preserving if we sacrifice its principles for convenience. Hadrian's jaw tightened, the only sign that Garrett's words had landed. You're relieved of this investigation. I'm assigning it to another officer. Someone with more experience, more perspective. You can't do that, sir. I'm a general. You're a cadet. I can do anything I want. Not this. The words hung in the air like smoke from a fired pistol. Brennan stood. Perhaps we should... Sit down, Commandant. Hadrian's voice could have frozen the Hudson solid. This is between my son and me. Merrick shifted by the window. His hand moved to rest on his belt where a saber would hang in combat. A nervous gesture, an unconscious preparation for violence that never came. Hadrian stepped closer to Garrett, close enough that Garrett could see the silver scars on his father's hands. Old wounds from old battles. Could smell the soap he'd used that morning. The same brand he'd used for 30 years. Do you know why I'm doing this? Hadrian asked quietly. To protect the institution. To protect you. The admission landed like a punch. Sir, if you pursue this investigation, you make an enemy of Senator Whitmore, a man who remembers every slight, who destroys careers for sport, who will ensure you never advance beyond second lieutenant, who will make certain that every assignment you receive for the next 30 years is punishment for humiliating his son. Hadrian's voice was lower now, almost gentle, almost human. I'm trying to save your career, your future, everything you've worked 4 years to build. My future isn't worth having if I buy it with dishonor. Dishonor? Hadrian laughed, sharp, bitter. You think choosing survival over principle is dishonorable? Ask the men who died at Antietam because they followed orders they knew were wrong. Ask the officers who sacrificed their careers to save their soldiers. Ask your brother what honor got him. The name hung between them like a ghost given form. Donovan died following your orders, Garrett said quietly. The room temperature dropped 20 degrees. What did you say? He died at Appomattox because you ordered him to hold a position that couldn't be held. Because you believed following orders was more important than asking if the orders made sense. Hadrian's hand moved. For one terrible moment, Garrett thought his father might strike him. But the general's discipline was absolute. His hand lowered. Get out. Sir, get out before I have you arrested for insubordination. Garrett stood, moved toward the door, stopped with his hand on the frame. I left a letter on my desk, Father. You should read it. Then he walked out into the frozen morning and didn't look back. Behind him in Brennan's office, silence reigned. Hadrian stood perfectly still, a statue carved from ice and old wars. Finally, Merrick spoke. Permission to speak freely, sir. Denied. I'm speaking anyway. Hadrian turned. His eyes were dangerous. Careful, Colonel. Garrett's right. He's an idealistic child who doesn't understand how the world works. He's a man who understands that some things matter more than survival. Merrick moved away from the window. His limp was more pronounced in cold weather. Confederate steel had cut deeper than flesh, had severed nerves that never fully healed. I followed orders at Kennesaw Mountain, orders I knew were wrong. I led 40 cavalry against an entrenched position because a general 3 miles away thought it would work. 37 of my men died. 3 survived with wounds that ended their lives slowly. He looked directly at Hadrian. I think about them every single day for 12 years. I see their faces, hear their screams, wonder what would have happened if I'd been brave enough to refuse, to say no to an order that made no tactical sense. Soldiers don't have that luxury. Officers do. That's the difference between following orders and leading men. Brennan had been silent until now, listening, watching the two veterans circle each other with words instead of sabers. General Aldrich, the commandant said quietly, I understand your position. I respect your desire to protect your son. But Garrett is correct. The honor code exists for a reason. If we compromise it for political convenience, we betray everything this institution represents. You're both fools. Hadrian's voice was flat, empty. Noble fools who think principles matter more than survival. But I've buried enough men who thought the same way. I won't bury another. He walked to the door. Stopped. Garrett will drop this investigation. One way or another. Even if I have to destroy his career to save his life. The door closed behind him. Merrick and Brennan looked at each other. This is going to get worse, Merrick said. Yes. The boy won't back down. No. Neither will his father. Brennan moved to the window, watched Hadrian cross the frozen grounds toward the visiting officers' quarters. The general walked like a man carrying the weight of 1,000 dead soldiers, like a father who'd lost one son and would do anything to save the second, even destroy him. Have you ever seen two people who love each other tear themselves apart? Brennan asked. Once, my parents. Father wanted my brother to be a doctor. Brother wanted to be a soldier. They fought for years, destroyed their relationship. My brother joined the army anyway, died at Shiloh. Father spent the rest of his life wondering if being right was worth losing his son. Was it? I don't know, but I know my father died alone, and my brother died young, and neither one got what they wanted. Brennan was quiet for a long moment. Garrett asked me what I would do in his position. I told him I'd follow orders and wonder forever if I was a coward. What's the real answer? The real answer is that there is no right choice. Only choices we can live with and choices we can't. Outside, snow began to fall, soft, silent, covering everything in white, hiding the blood-soaked ground where battles had been fought, where more battles would be fought, where young men learned that the hardest wars weren't against enemy armies. They were against the people you loved who wanted to save you from yourself. Garrett found Jonathan Hayes in the chapel. The building was empty, cold. Light filtered through stained glass windows depicting scenes from American military history. Washington at Valley Forge, Perry at Lake Erie, Scott at Mexico City. Men who'd made hard choices and lived with consequences. Hayes sat in the front pew, head bowed, hands clasped. He wasn't praying, just sitting, existing in the space between one disaster and the next. Garrett's boots echoed on the stone floor. Hayes looked up. His face was gray, eyes hollow. He'd lost more weight. The uniform that had been too loose 3 days ago now hung on him like funeral clothes. Captain. Hayes. Garrett sat beside him. For a moment, neither spoke. Outside wind rattled windows that had stood since 1820. I read your statement, Garrett said finally, about Whitmore, about the loan, the coercion. Are you here to expel me? That's not my decision. Whose is it? My father's, apparently. Hayes looked at him, really looked at him. Saw something there that made him sit up straighter. Your father is General Aldrich. Yes, the hero of Antietam. That's what the citations say. Hayes laughed, sharp, bitter, a sound like breaking glass. So I'm going to be judged by a general, a man who knows senators, who understands politics, who'll look at this situation and see exactly what everyone sees. A poor kid who made a mistake versus a rich kid whose father controls money. You think he'll protect Whitmore? I think powerful people protect each other, and people like me are expendable. The words were acid, truth distilled to its most corrosive form. Garrett wanted to argue, to say his father was honorable. That rank didn't corrupt judgment. That justice would prevail. But he'd seen the look in Hadrian's eyes, heard the calculation in his voice, understood that his father would sacrifice Hayes without hesitation if it meant protecting the institution, protecting Garrett. I won't let that happen, Garrett said. Hayes stared at him. You can't stop it. Watch me. Captain, with respect, you're one cadet. Your father is a general. Whitmore's father is a senator. What are you going to do? Defy them both. Destroy your own career to save mine, if necessary. Why? The question hung in the cold air. Why indeed Garrett thought about Donovan, about a brother who'd died following orders he'd never questioned, about living under the weight of that death for 11 years, about a father who'd turned grief into armor and love into prison. Because someone has to, Garrett said finally. Because if we don't stand up for what's right when it's hard, then the code means nothing. We're just words on paper. Promises we break the moment keeping them becomes inconvenient. Hayes was quiet for a long time. I wrote a letter, he said finally, to my mother telling her I'm sorry, that I failed her, that everything she sacrificed was for nothing. Don't send it. Why not? It's true. No, what's true is that you were put in an impossible position by someone who saw your desperation and weaponized it. What's true is that you made one mistake under extreme pressure. That doesn't erase 4 years of hard work, doesn't invalidate your mother's sacrifice. The honor code doesn't care about pressure or circumstances. It only cares about the violation. Then maybe the honor code needs to learn the difference between predator and prey. The words surprised Garrett as much as they surprised Hayes. They sat together in silence. Outside, the snow fell harder, covering the grounds in white, making everything look clean, pure, innocent. It was a lie, but it was a beautiful one. What happens now? Hayes asked. Now we wait. My father will make his decision, and then we'll deal with the consequences. And if he decides to expel me, Garrett stood, looked down at the young man who'd been drowning for weeks and finally found someone willing to throw him a rope. Then I'll make sure everyone knows why. I'll make sure the truth gets out, even if it costs me everything. Hayes stood too, extended his hand. Thank you, Captain. Whatever happens, thank you for believing me. They shook, two young men standing in an empty chapel, making promises they might not be able to keep, holding on to principles in a world that valued pragmatism over honor. Garrett left Hayes there, walked back out into the snow. He had one more person to see. Lieutenant Colonel Merrick's quarters occupied a small building near the riding stables. The smell of horses and leather drifted through the cold air. Inside the rooms were Spartan, a bed, a desk, a trunk containing everything Merrick owned. On the wall, a single photograph, a company of cavalry soldiers, 40 men. 37 of them would be dead within a year. Merrick sat at his desk cleaning a pistol. The weapon was old, Civil War vintage, the kind of sidearm officers carried when sabers weren't enough and prayer was too late. Come in, Garrett. Garrett hadn't knocked, but Merrick had been a cavalry officer. Men who survived by surprise learned to hear everything. Sir, I need advice. You need a drink, but advice will have to do. Merrick gestured to a chair. Garrett sat. The colonel continued cleaning his pistol. Methodical, precise. The work of a man who'd learned that weapons maintenance was the difference between living and dying. Your father ordered you to drop the investigation. Yes, sir. And you refused. Yes, sir. Brave, stupid, probably both. Merrick held the pistol up to the light, checked the cylinder. Satisfied, he set it down. I'm going to tell you a story. You're going to listen. Then you're going to make your own decision. Fair. Yes, sir. September 1864. Kennesaw Mountain, Georgia. Sherman's pushing toward Atlanta. Confederate forces are dug in, fortified positions, artillery, the works. Merrick's voice was flat, reciting facts, but his eyes were somewhere else, somewhere 12 years and 1,000 miles away. My general orders cavalry assault on an entrenched position. I tell him it won't work. Tell him we'll be cut to pieces before we get within 50 yards. He says the orders stand. That sometimes soldiers die, so the mission succeeds. I had two choices: refuse the order, save my men, face court-martial, or follow the order, lead my men to slaughter, keep my honor intact. The room was silent except for wind outside and the tick of a clock on the mantel. I chose honor, led the charge, watched 37 men die. 3 survived with wounds that killed them slowly over the next 2 years. Infections, shattered bones, pieces of shrapnel working their way to vital organs. Merrick's hand moved unconsciously to his leg, the wound that still ached in cold weather. I got a medal, promotion to major, commendations for bravery under fire. Everything except the one thing I wanted. What was that, sir? My men alive. He looked directly at Garrett. Here's what I learned. Honor is a luxury purchased with other people's suffering. Principles are expensive, and the bill comes due when you least expect it. Are you saying I should drop the investigation? I'm saying you should understand the cost before you commit. Your father isn't trying to hurt you. He's trying to save you from making the same mistake I made, from sacrificing yourself and others on the altar of principles. But you think I should do it anyway. Merrick smiled, sad, tired. I think you're going to do it regardless of what I say. because you're young and idealistic. And you haven't yet learned that the world breaks people who refuse to bend. He stood, walked to the window, looked out at the snow. But here's the thing about young idealists. Sometimes they're right. Sometimes the world needs breaking. Sometimes rigid principles are the only thing standing between civilization and chaos. How do I know which this is? You don't. None of us do. We make our choices and live with them. Or don't live with them. Either way, the choice gets made. Garrett stood to leave. Sir, one more question. Go ahead. Do you regret following that order at Kennesaw Mountain? Merrick was quiet for a long time. Every single day. But I also know that if I'd refused, I'd spend every day wondering if I was a coward. So maybe regret is just the price of being human. Maybe we're supposed to carry it. Use it to make better choices next time. What if there is no next time? Then you better make this choice count. Garrett walked back to his quarters through deepening snow. The academy grounds were empty. Cadets were in classes. Officers were in meetings. The world continued its relentless forward motion while he stood still trapped between two impossible choices. Obey his father, save his career. Let Whitmore escape consequences. Watch Hayes be destroyed alone. Or defy his father. Risk everything. Stand on principle. Accept whatever destruction followed. His room was cold when he entered. On his desk, exactly where he'd left it, his letter to his father waited. But beside it, a new letter, addressed in his father's precise handwriting. Garrett picked it up, broke the seal. The message was short. Garrett, I read your letter. I understand your position. I disagree with every word. You think honoring your brother means dying like him, following principles off a cliff, making gestures that change nothing except the body count. I know better. I watched him die. Held him while blood soaked into Georgia mud. Listened to his last words asking if he'd done well. If he'd made me proud, I told him yes. I lied. The truth is, his death accomplished nothing, changed nothing. He died because I gave an order I shouldn't have given, because I believed following procedure mattered more than protecting my men. I won't make that mistake twice. You will drop this investigation. You will obey this order, not because I demand it, but because I'm asking you. Father to son, the only thing I have left to the only son I have left, please, don't make me bury another boy who thought honor mattered more than survival. Your father, Hadrian. Garrett read the letter 3 times, felt the weight of his father's grief, his fear, his absolute conviction that protecting Garrett meant controlling him, that love meant preventing him from making his own mistakes. He understood it, even sympathized with it, but understanding didn't mean accepting. Garrett took out fresh paper, wrote a reply. Father, I'm sorry. I can't be the son you want. The one who lives safe and small and protected from every hard choice. Donovan died following your orders, but he died believing in something, standing for something. That matters, even if you can't see it. I won't drop the investigation. I won't compromise the honor code to make your life easier or mine safer, not to defy you, but to be worthy of the brother I lost. And the father I remember before grief turned you into stone. I love you, even if you can't forgive me, Garrett. He sealed the letter, left it on his father's pillow in the visiting officer's quarters. Then he returned to his room, gathered his evidence, organized his report. Tomorrow he would present his findings to Commandant Brennan. His father would be furious, would probably make good on every threat, would use every ounce of influence to destroy Garrett's career before it started. But some things mattered more than careers. Some promises to dead brothers couldn't be broken. Some cages once open couldn't be locked again. Outside, the snow fell harder. Inside, Garrett prepared for war with the only family he had left. The stone walls of West Point had witnessed this story 1,000 times. Sons defying fathers. Principles clashing with pragmatism. The eternal war between what should be and what must be. The walls would stand long after all of them were dust. But the choices they made inside these walls would echo far beyond stone and ceremony, would ripple forward through years they couldn't see, through lives they'd never meet, would determine whether institutions served principles or principles served institutions. Garrett closed his eyes, thought of Donovan, of Hayes, of 37 cavalry soldiers who died following orders. Then he opened them, picked up his pen, and began writing the report that would change everything. The knock came at 10 o'clock. Garrett was awake, had been awake since sunset, sitting at his desk reviewing evidence for the 100th time. Outside, temperature had dropped to 15 below zero, the kind of cold that turned breath to ice crystals, that made metal burn skin, That killed the unprepared in hours. Enter. Malcolm Hendricks stood in the doorway. His face was white, not from cold. Captain Aldrich, it's Hayes. Garrett was on his feet before Hendricks finished the sentence. What happened? He's gone, left the barracks around 9. Said he needed air. That was an hour ago. I checked his room, found this. Hendricks handed over a folded paper. Garrett recognized the handwriting immediately. The same careful script from Hayes' statement, but shakier now, letters wobbling like a drunk man's walk. He unfolded it. The note was short. I cannot live with the shame of what I have done. I cannot face my mother's disappointment. I cannot remain in a place where my presence dishonors everything West Point represents. By the time anyone reads this, I will have removed myself from the burden of choosing between bad outcomes. Tell Captain Aldrich I am sorry I wasted his faith. Tell my mother I tried to be worthy of her sacrifice. Tell Commandant Brennan the honor code wins. As it should. J.H. The words hit like artillery shells. Garrett's mind raced through possibilities. Locations. Methods. How a desperate young man might end his life on a frozen military academy. The Hudson River, 2 miles away, already frozen solid near the banks. But the center still moved. Dark water under thin ice. Cold enough to stop a heart in minutes. Get Hendricks, wake Lieutenant Colonel Merrick. Tell him to meet me at Grant Hall immediately. Then sound general alarm. Sir, it's after lights out. Sounding alarm will. Now, cadet, a man's life depends on it. Hendricks ran. Garrett pulled on his heaviest coat, grabbed gloves, scarf, the kind of gear cavalrymen carried for winter campaigns. Then he ran through the barracks, pounding on doors. Everyone up, assemble in the courtyard now. Confused cadets stumbled into the hallway, some in uniform, others in nightshirts, all of them shivering. What's happening? Cadet Hayes is missing. Possible suicide attempt. We need search parties. Anyone who knows the grounds, the surrounding area, any place a man might go to be alone. Get dressed. Full cold weather gear. Move. The barracks exploded into activity. Grant Hall was lit like a bonfire. Commandant Brennan stood in the main chamber, already dressed, already organizing. Maps spread across the table. Oil lamps burning bright. The machinery of crisis management grinding into motion. Merrick arrived 30 seconds after Garrett. The colonel's face was grim. How long has he been gone? An hour, maybe more. In this cold, that's a death sentence if he's outside. I know. Brennan pointed to the map. Hudson River is most likely, but we also have the cliffs to the north, the old fortifications to the south, the woods to the west. We need to split up, Garrett said. Cover all areas simultaneously. Agreed, I'll organize 3 teams. Merrick, you take the fortifications. I'll take the woods. Garrett, you take the river. Sir, I should... You know Hayes best. You understand his thinking. If he went to the river, you're the one who can talk him back. A commotion at the door. General Hadrian Aldrich entered, coat half-buttoned, face carved from ice and fury. What's this about a missing cadet? Brennan explained quickly. Efficiently, left out nothing. Hadrian's expression darkened with each sentence. When Brennan finished, the general turned to Garrett. This is your fault. The words were bullets, designed to wound. Sir, you pushed this investigation, drove Hayes to desperation. Now a young man is probably dead because you couldn't let it go, couldn't follow orders, couldn't understand that your principles have consequences. The room went silent. Garrett felt every eye on him, felt the weight of accusation, the possibility that his father was right, that his rigid adherence to honor had driven a desperate young man to suicide. General Aldrich, Merrick's voice cut through the tension. With respect, this is not the time. We have a cadet in danger. Recriminations can wait. Hadrian looked at Merrick. Something dangerous flickered in his eyes, but military discipline held. Rank had its privileges, but it also had its obligations. Fine, but when this is over, we're settling this, all of it. He turned to Garrett. You want to save Hayes, then save him. Prove your principles are worth a damn, or admit that I was right and you were a fool. The search parties assembled in the courtyard. 40 cadets, dressed for winter war, carrying lanterns, ropes, medical supplies. Young men who should have been sleeping, who now faced a night of searching frozen wilderness for a classmate who might already be dead. Garrett stood before the group heading to the river. 8 cadets, all volunteers, all understanding the risks. Listen carefully, the Hudson is partially frozen. Ice near the banks, moving water in the center. Anyone who goes through will have minutes before hypothermia sets in. We stay together, we check the banks systematically. We do not take unnecessary risks. He paused, made eye contact with each man. Hayes is one of us. We don't leave men behind. Understood? Yes, sir. They moved out into the night. The cold was a living thing. It wrapped around them like a predator, slipped through gaps in clothing, found skin, and turned it numb. Made breathing painful, made thinking slow. Garrett led them across the frozen grounds, past the chapel where he'd spoken with Hayes 4 days ago, past the academic buildings where Hayes had spent 4 years trying to earn a future, past the barracks where his roommates still waited, hoping for impossible news. The river was a mile and a half away, in daylight and easy walk. In this cold, this darkness, it felt like crossing a continent. Behind him, the cadets followed in silence. Their lanterns bobbed like fireflies. Their breath formed clouds that froze and fell as ice crystals. Garrett's mind raced through scenarios. If Hayes had gone to the river where exactly the banks stretched for miles, dozens of places to enter the water, hundreds of places to hide if he'd changed his mind, thousands of places to lie down and let the cold take him. Think like Hayes. Desperate, ashamed, looking for an end that felt noble instead of pathetic. The bridge. 2.5 miles upriver. An old stone structure built during the Revolution. 30 feet above the water. High enough that a fall would be certain. Quick. Less suffering than freezing. Change of plans, Garrett called back. We're heading to the old bridge. Double time. They ran, through snow that had drifted 3 feet deep in places, over ice that cracked under their boots, past trees that stood like skeletal sentries watching their desperate race. Garrett's lungs burned. The cold air felt like inhaling knives. His legs screamed for rest. His body demanded he slow down, find shelter, survive. But somewhere ahead, Jonathan Hayes was dying, and Garrett had promised to save him. They saw the bridge through the trees, stone arches rising from frozen banks, built in 1780 by soldiers who'd survived Valley Forge, who'd learned what cold could do to men, who'd built something to last. And standing on the rail silhouetted against the star-filled sky was Jonathan Hayes. Garrett held up his hand. The cadet stopped. Stay here, don't move, don't make noise. If he jumps, you throw ropes, understood? They nodded. Garrett moved forward alone. Slow, careful, each step placed with precision on ice that could crack, on snow that could shift. Hayes stood perfectly still, coat open, hat gone, gloves somewhere in the snow. He'd been here long enough for the cold to start winning. His body swayed slightly, hypothermia's first whisper. Hayes, the young man didn't turn. Jonathan, it's Captain Aldrich. Go away. The words were slurred, cold or despair or both. I can't do that. Then watch. Someone should witness. Someone should tell my mother I wasn't a coward at the end. Garrett stopped 10 feet away, close enough to talk, too far to grab if Hayes jumped. You're not a coward, Jonathan. Cowards run from consequences. You're facing them, just facing them the wrong way. There is no right way. I violated the honor code. I cheated. Doesn't matter why Doesn't matter that Whitmore threatened me. I still did it. I'm still guilty. You're right. The admission seemed to surprise Hayes. He turned slightly, not enough to lose balance, just enough to see Garrett's face in the starlight. What? You're guilty. You violated the code. Under normal circumstances, you'd be expelled. Your career would be over. Everything you worked for would be ash. Then why are you here to watch justice be served? I'm here because circumstances aren't normal. Because you were coerced, threatened, put in an impossible position by someone who saw your desperation and weaponized it. Garrett moved closer. Just a step. Testing. Hayes didn't jump. That doesn't change what I did. No, but it changes what it means. There's a difference between choosing dishonor and being forced into it, between predator and prey, between Whitmore and you. The honor code doesn't recognize that difference. Then maybe the honor code is incomplete. The words hung in the frozen air. Hayes stared at him. You're the one who's been defending it. Who wants to enforce it even though it'll destroy the Academy's funding? Even though your father ordered you to stop. And now you're saying it's incomplete. I'm saying honor without mercy is just cruelty in uniform. I'm saying principles without context are weapons that hit innocent and guilty alike. I'm saying I was so focused on enforcing the code that I forgot why the code exists. Garrett was close enough now to see Hayes's face properly. See the tears frozen on his cheeks, the blue tint to his lips, the way his hands shook from more than just cold. Why does it exist? To make us better, to hold us to a standard higher than convenience. but also to recognize that we're human, that we make mistakes, that coercion is different from choice. Your father doesn't believe that. My father lost a son to rigid thinking, lost Donovan because he believed following orders mattered more than questioning them. Now he's so terrified of losing me that he'll compromise anything to keep me safe. Garrett extended his hand. But I'm not Donovan, and you're not Whitmore. And this moment right here, this is where we prove that honor includes understanding, that justice includes mercy, that the code protects people instead of destroying them. Hayes looked at the hand, at the drop, at the dark water moving under thin ice. I can't face my mother, can't tell her I failed. You didn't fail. You survived. You were put in an impossible situation by a predator, and you made a choice that kept you alive. That's not failure. That's human. The academy will expel me anyway. Maybe, probably. But there's a difference between dying ashamed and living with consequences, between ending your story and fighting for a second chapter. Garrett's hand remained extended, steady, despite the cold, despite the fear, despite knowing that his next words would either save a life or watch it end. Your mother didn't sacrifice everything so you could give up when things got hard. She sacrificed so you could survive, so you could fight, so you could become the man she believed you could be. What if I'm not that man, Hank? Then you become him, starting right now, starting with choosing to live, choosing to fight, choosing to face what comes instead of running from it. Hayes's body swayed. For one terrible moment, Garrett thought he would fall, would choose the quick darkness of the river over the slow struggle of consequences. But Hayes stepped back from the rail, took Garrett's hand, and collapsed into the snow, sobbing like a child who'd finally found safety after hours of being lost. Garrett caught him, held him, felt the young man's body shake with cold and fear and relief. I've got you. You're safe. I've got you. The cadets rushed forward with blankets, medical supplies, hands that pulled Hayes away from the edge, that wrapped him in woolen warmth, that carried him back toward life. Garrett stood on the bridge alone for a moment, looked at the rail where Hayes had stood, at the drop, at the water that would have killed him in minutes. How many young men had stood here over the years? How many had faced impossible choices? How many had jumped? How many had been saved? He didn't know, but he knew one more name that wouldn't be added to the list. Sir, one of the cadets, young, barely 18. We need to move. Get Hayes back to the infirmary. He's hypothermic, frostbite on his hands. We have maybe an hour before it gets serious. Garrett nodded. They formed a column. Hayes in the center, supported by 2 cadets, the rest surrounding him like a guard protecting precious cargo. The march back took 40 minutes. Hayes slipped in and out of consciousness, mumbled apologies, asked for his mother, repeated, I'm sorry, like a prayer to gods that didn't answer. Garrett walked beside him, one hand on the young man's shoulder, a reminder that he wasn't alone, that someone had come into the darkness to bring him back. The lights of West Point appeared through the trees like a city at the end of a long war. The infirmary doors opened. Dr. Cornelius Ashford waited with hot water blankets and the practiced calm of a man who'd treated frostbite 100 times. Get him inside. Strip off the wet clothes. Warm water, not hot. Slowly. I need to check his core temperature. They carried Hayes into the building. Garrett started to follow. A hand on his shoulder stopped him. General Hadrian Aldrich. His father's face was stone, but his eyes held something else. Something that might have been relief, or regret, or the terrible understanding that he'd been wrong. Is he alive? Yes, sir. Will he survive? Dr. Ashford says yes. Frostbite on his fingers, mild hypothermia, but he'll recover physically. Hadrian nodded, released Garrett's shoulder, stood there in the snow. 2 men who shared blood and nothing else, who loved each other in languages the other couldn't speak. You saved him. Yes, sir. You disobeyed my orders, pushed the investigation, drove him to this, then saved him. Garrett said nothing. There was nothing to say. His father's assessment was accurate, brutal, complete. I don't know whether to commend you or court-martial you. Neither, sir. Just let me finish what I started. Hadrian's jaw tightened. The internal war played out across his face. Father versus general. Love versus duty. Fear versus faith. Finally, he spoke. Tomorrow morning, 10 o'clock, you will present your full investigation to a board of 6 officers. I'll be on that board, so will Brennan, Merrick, 3 others from the War Department. A formal hearing, a tribunal. We'll determine what happened, who is responsible, what consequences follow, Everything done by the book. Everything official. Hadrian stepped closer. His voice dropped. But understand something, Garrett. When you walk into that room tomorrow, you're not just presenting evidence. You're putting yourself on trial. Your judgment, your methods, your decision to pursue this despite orders from superior officers. I understand, sir. I don't think you do. Because if the board determines you acted improperly, if they find your investigation was harassment or overreach or personal vendetta, you'll be expelled, court-martialed. Your career will end before it begins. I know. And you're willing to risk that. Everything you've worked for, 4 years of study training, sacrifice all of it on the altar of principle. Garrett met his father's eyes, saw the fear there, the desperate hope that even now at the last moment his son would choose safety over honor, would step back from the edge just as Hayes had. Donovan didn't have a choice, Garrett said quietly. He followed your orders and died, but I have a choice. I can walk into that room tomorrow and tell the truth. Or I can lie, protect myself. Let Whitmore escape consequences while Hayes is destroyed. Donovan died because he was reckless, because he charged enemy positions without thinking, because he believed glory mattered more than survival. No, he died because you taught him that following orders mattered more than questioning them. That duty meant obedience instead of judgment. The words landed like artillery. Hadrian's face went white. How dare you? I'm not trying to hurt you, father. I'm trying to make you understand. You blame yourself for Donovan's death. You think you gave a bad order. And maybe you did. But you know what Donovan's real mistake was? Enlighten me. He never learned to say no, never learned that sometimes the right thing is refusing. Standing up, accepting consequences for doing what's correct instead of what's commanded. Garrett's voice was softer now, gentler. I love you, Father. But I can't be the son you want, the one who lives small and safe and protected from every hard choice. I have to be the son Donovan would have wanted, the one who learned from his death instead of being paralyzed by it. Hadrian stood perfectly still. Snowflakes landed on his shoulders, in his hair, turned him into a statue slowly being buried by winter. When he finally spoke, his voice was barely a whisper. If you do this, I can't protect you. I know. If the board rules against you, I can't save your career. I know. You could lose everything. I know. Father and son faced each other across a gulf wider than the Hudson, deeper than the graves where brothers and soldiers slept. Why buy? Hadrian asked. Why throw away your future for a code that doesn't care about you, for an institution that will forget you the moment you're gone? Because someone has to. Because if we don't stand for something when it's hard, then we stand for nothing when it's easy. Because 37 cavalry soldiers died at Kennesaw Mountain because good men followed bad orders. Because Donovan died at Appomattox because he never questioned whether the position was worth holding. Garrett stepped closer. Because Jonathan Hayes stood on a bridge tonight, ready to die, because he thought honor meant punishment instead of understanding. And I'll be damned if I let another young man destroy himself, and because the code forgot to include mercy. The silence stretched. Somewhere behind them in the infirmary, Hayes was being saved, warmed, brought back from the edge of death. Somewhere above them, stars wheeled through cold sky. Indifferent, eternal. Somewhere in the future, the consequences of this moment would ripple forward, would touch lives not yet born, would determine whether institutions served principles or principles served institutions. Hadrian raised one hand. For a moment, Garrett thought his father might strike him. Instead, the general placed his hand on Garrett's shoulder, gripped it, hard enough to hurt, hard enough to communicate what words couldn't. You're either the bravest man I've ever known or the biggest fool. Tomorrow we'll find out which. He released Garrett's shoulder, turned, walked away through the snow. Garrett watched him go. Watched the man who'd taught him duty and honor and rigid adherence to orders, who'd lost one son to those principles and was terrified of losing another, who couldn't understand that sometimes love meant letting go, meant trusting, meant accepting that sons had to make their own mistakes, fight their own battles, build their own honor from the ashes of their father's failures. The infirmary door opened. Dr. Ashford emerged. His face was tired but satisfied. Captain Aldrich, Hayes is stable. Core temperature is rising. Frostbite is superficial. He'll keep all his fingers. And more importantly, he'll live. Can I see him? Briefly, he's asking for you. Hayes lay under 3 blankets. His hands were wrapped in bandages. His face was still pale but warming, color returning like dawn after the longest night. He opened his eyes when Garrett entered. You came. I promised I wouldn't abandon you. You could have let me jump. Would have solved everyone's problems, except the problem of living with your death on my conscience. Hayes smiled weakly. Conscience, the thing that makes honor so expensive. They sat in silence for a moment. Outside, the search parties were returning, cadets stumbling into barracks, officers filing reports. The machinery of West Point grinding back to normal after crisis. What happens tomorrow? Hayes asked. Formal hearing, 10 o'clock. The board will review evidence. Determine consequences for you, for Whitmore, for me, for you. I disobeyed direct orders from a general, pursued an investigation I was commanded to drop. That has consequences. Hayes struggled to sit up. Captain, you can't. Lie back. Doctor's orders. You can't sacrifice your career for mine. It's not worth it. Garrett looked at the young man who'd been ready to die an hour ago, who'd stood on a bridge in the freezing dark believing he had no value, no future, no worth beyond his mistakes. Let me tell you something about worth, Jonathan. You came to West Point from an Ohio farm. You earned a scholarship through merit. You studied harder than anyone in your class. You survived 4 years of the hardest academic program in America. I also cheated, violated the code, under coercion, under threat, in a moment of desperation created by a predator who saw your vulnerability and exploited it. Garrett leaned forward. You know what I see when I look at you? I see a young man who made one mistake, one choice in a moment of impossible pressure. But I also see a young man who had the courage to confess, to testify against his accuser, to stand on that bridge tonight and ultimately choose life over escape. That's not courage. That's weakness. No, jumping would have been weakness. Staying alive is the hardest choice of all, especially when alive means facing consequences. Accepting judgment, living with shame. Hayes' eyes were wet. I don't know how to live with this. You learn, day by day, choice by choice. You carry it, use it, let it make you better instead of destroying you. Garrett stood. Tomorrow the board will decide your fate. I don't know what they'll rule, but I know this. Whatever happens, you survived tonight. You came back from the edge. That matters more than any code, any principle, any institution. He moved toward the door. Captain, Garrett turned. Thank you for coming into the dark, for bringing me back. Don't thank me yet. Wait until you see what tomorrow brings. But Garrett smiled as he said it, because Jonathan Hayes was alive, and that at least was one victory that couldn't be taken away. No matter what the morning held, Grant Hall had never felt so vast, or so cold. Garrett stood at the defendant's table alone. Behind him, 100 cadets packed the gallery. Their silence was heavier than any crowd noise could have been, the kind of silence that precedes battles or executions. Before him, elevated on the stone platform, 6 officers sat in judgment. General Hadrian Aldrich, center seat, face carved from winter itself. Commandant Thaddeus Brennan, to his right, eyes unreadable behind decades of military discipline. Lieutenant Colonel Silas Merrick. To his left, the scar on his face catching morning light through the Gothic windows. 3 colonels from the War Department, men Garrett had never met, men who owed him nothing, men who would decide his future with the same clinical precision they'd used to approve ammunition requisitions. This tribunal will come to order. Brennan's voice filled the chamber. Formal, official, all traces of the man who'd shared whiskey and doubts erased behind the mask of authority. Cadet Captain Garrett Aldrich stands accused of conduct unbecoming an officer, specifically pursuing an investigation after being ordered to cease, insubordination to a superior officer, and reckless endangerment of a fellow cadet through his actions. The words landed like stones dropped into still water, each one sending ripples that would reach shore eventually, that would reshape everything they touched. Additionally, this tribunal will determine the fate of Cadet Jonathan Hayes and Cadet Thomas Whitmore regarding violations of the Academy Honor Code. Garrett's hands were steady at his sides. His uniform was perfect, every button fastened, every crease sharp, but his heart was thunder. Cadet Captain Aldrich, do you understand the charges? I do, sir. How do you plead? This was the moment, the choice that would define everything after. Garrett could plead guilty to insubordination, accept punishment, save his career through contrition. Let the board deal with Hayes and Whitmore separately, or he could fight. Not guilty, sir. I followed my duty as I understood it. I investigated an honor code violation. I pursued the truth. If that constitutes insubordination, then I'm guilty of being an officer rather than a clerk. Murmurs rippled through the gallery. One of the War Department colonels leaned forward, eyes sharp with interest. Hadrian's expression never changed. Very well, Brennan said. Present your evidence. Garrett had prepared for 3 days. 3 days since pulling Hayes back from the edge. 3 days of organizing evidence, refining arguments, preparing for a battle where words were weapons and truth was ammunition. He walked to the evidence table, picked up the examination papers. December 20th engineering examination. 2 cadets submitted identical answers. Not similar, identical, including identical errors in calculation. He held up the papers. Let the board see. Thomas Whitmore and Jonathan Hayes. One is the son of a senator. One is a scholarship student from Ohio. The evidence suggests both cheated, but the evidence also reveals something more important. Garrett set down the papers, picked up financial records. Thomas Whitmore received $800 from his father over 2 years. Each payment arrived within 1 week of a major examination. The timing is not coincidental. He pulled out witness statements. Cadet Malcolm Hendricks testifies that he heard Whitmore threaten Hayes, that he witnessed coercion, that Hayes was trapped by debt deliberately engineered by Whitmore. Garrett turned to face the board directly. This was not 2 cadets cheating. This was 1 cadet weaponizing another's desperation. Predator and prey. The honor code was violated. But context matters. Justice without mercy is just cruelty in uniform. Cadet Aldrich, one of the War Department colonels, interrupted. Are you suggesting we ignore honor code violations based on circumstances? No, sir. I'm suggesting we recognize the difference between choosing dishonor and being forced into it. Between Thomas Whitmore, who orchestrated fraud for personal gain, and Jonathan Hayes, who made one terrible choice under impossible pressure. The code makes no such distinction. Then perhaps the code is incomplete. The gallery erupted. Cadets whispered. Officers shifted. Hadrian's jaw tightened. But he said nothing. Brennan raised his hand. Silence fell. Continue, Cadet Captain. Garrett called his first witness. I call Jonathan Hayes. The infirmary doors at the back of the hall opened. Hayes entered, hands still bandaged from frostbite. His uniform hung loose on a frame that had lost 15 pounds. His face was pale, hollow, but he walked to the witness stand without hesitation. State your name for the record. Cadet Jonathan Hayes, 3rd class. Did you cheat on the December 20th engineering examination? Silence. Every eye in the chamber fixed on Hayes. Yes. The word fell like a guillotine blade. Why? Hayes looked down at his bandaged hands. When he spoke, his voice was quiet, but it carried. I needed money. My father died first year, left my family in debt. Thomas Whitmore offered a loan, $200, no interest. I thought he was being generous. Hayes looked up, met Garrett's eyes. I was wrong. The loan was a trap. He waited until I was desperate. Then he told me I had to help him cheat or he'd report me for financial dishonesty. Said my mother would lose everything trying to pay him back. Said my siblings would starve. What did you do? I let him copy my answers. I violated the honor code. I'm guilty. Were you threatened? Yes. Did you report the threat? No, I was too afraid, too ashamed. I thought if I just did what he wanted, it would go away, that I could protect my family and finish my education. Hayes's voice broke. I was wrong about that too. Garrett nodded, turned to the board. No further questions. One of the War Department colonels leaned forward. Cadet Hayes, you stood on a bridge 4 nights ago. You wrote a suicide note. You were prepared to end your life rather than face consequences. Does that sound like a man who made a rational choice? Hayes was quiet for a long moment. No, sir. It sounds like a man who believed honor meant punishment instead of redemption, who thought the code existed to destroy rather than protect. And now I understand that surviving is harder than dying, that facing consequences is braver than running, that Captain Aldrich came into the darkness to bring me back because he believes the code can include mercy. Hayes looked at Garrett, then at the board. I violated the honor code. I deserve expulsion. But I also deserve the chance to explain why, to let you judge the whole truth instead of just the violation. The colonel nodded, sat back. Dismissed. Garrett called his second witness. I call Cadet Thomas Whitmore. The doors opened. Whitmore entered. 21 years old, handsome, confident, every inch the senator's son. He walked to the stand like a man attending a social function, not a man facing judgment. State your name. Thomas Harrison Whitmore, 1st class. Did you cheat on the engineering examination? No. The lie was smooth, practiced, delivered with the absolute confidence of someone who'd never faced real consequences. You deny receiving answers from Cadet Hayes. I deny cheating. Perhaps our answers were similar because we studied together. Perhaps we used the same formulas. Similar minds reach similar conclusions. Garrett pulled out financial records. Your father sent you $800 over 2 years. Each payment arrived before major examinations. Explain that. My father is generous. I have expenses. The timing is coincidental. 8 times. I don't track my father's financial decisions. Garrett changed tactics. You loaned Hayes $200 in October. Wipe out. To help a classmate in need, an act of charity. And in December, you demanded repayment in the form of examination answers. Whitmore's eyes flickered, just for a moment. But enough. That's a lie. Hayes is trying to save himself by dragging me down. It's pathetic. Cadet Hendricks heard you threaten Hayes. Multiple witnesses place you in Hayes' room the night before the examination. The evidence is overwhelming. Evidence can be fabricated. Witnesses can lie. I've done nothing wrong except try to help someone who now betrays me. Garrett stared at him, saw the absolute absence of shame, the certainty of someone who'd never been told no, who believed power and money could erase any transgression. No further questions. Whitmore stood to leave. Sit down, Cadet. General Hadrian Aldrich spoke for the first time. His voice was cold. Absolute. I have questions. Hadrian stood, walked down from the platform, approached Whitmore like a general surveying an enemy position. Your father is Senator Alastair Whitmore, chairman of military appropriations. Yes, sir. A powerful man. Yes, sir. You believe that power protects you, that wealth insulates you from consequences, that you can cheat and lie and destroy a classmate's life without facing judgment. It wasn't a question. It was an indictment. Whitmore's confidence wavered, just slightly. Sir, I've read the evidence, all of it. Financial records, witness statements, timeline analysis. You orchestrated this fraud with the same calculation your father uses in politics. You identified a vulnerable target, exploited his desperation, then weaponized his mistake to protect yourself. Hadrian stepped closer. You are everything wrong with this institution. You represent birth over merit, privilege over honor, the belief that rules exist for others, but not for you. General Aldrich, your father will do nothing, because if he attempts to retaliate against this academy for expelling you, I will personally ensure that every newspaper in Washington knows exactly what his son did. I will make certain that the story of how Thomas Whitmore cheated and coerced and lied becomes more famous than anything your father ever accomplished. Hadrian's voice was ice. Your father's power ends at these walls. Inside Grant Hall, only one thing matters: the truth. And the truth is that you're a disgrace to the uniform you don't deserve to wear. He turned to the board. I recommend immediate expulsion. Permanent. No appeals. No mercy. Then he walked back to his seat. Garrett stared at his father. Saw something he'd never seen before. Not the man who'd lost Donovan. Not the general terrified of losing another son. But the officer who believed in something larger than safety. Who understood that some principles mattered more than politics. The father Garrett had been searching for his entire life. The board deliberated for 20 minutes. 20 minutes that felt like 20 hours. Garrett stood at his table. Hayes sat in the gallery, bandaged hands folded. Whitmore stood rigid, finally understanding that money and power had limits. Finally, Brennan spoke. This tribunal has reached its verdicts. In the matter of Cadet Thomas Whitmore, the board finds by unanimous vote guilty of violating the honor code, guilty of academic dishonesty, guilty of coercion and fraud. Cadet Whitmore is hereby expelled from the United States Military Academy effective immediately. This decision is final and without appeal. Whitmore's face went white. In the matter of Cadet Jonathan Hayes, the board finds guilty of violating the honor code. However, in recognition of extraordinary circumstances, including coercion and duress, the board sentences Cadet Hayes to 1 year suspension. He may apply for readmission in January 1877, subject to review. Hayes closed his eyes. Tears ran down his face. In the matter of Cadet Captain Garrett Aldrich, the charges of insubordination and reckless endangerment are dismissed. The board finds that Cadet Aldrich acted within his authority as investigating officer, that he pursued truth in accordance with his duty, that his methods, while unorthodox, were justified by circumstances. Brennan paused. Furthermore, the board commends Cadet Captain Aldrich for courage in the face of pressure from superior officers, for refusing to compromise honor for political convenience, for saving the life of a fellow cadet, He is hereby restored to full status and rank. The gallery erupted. Cadets stood, applauded. The sound filled the ancient hall like thunder. Garrett stood perfectly still, unable to process what had just happened. He'd won. The honor code had survived. Hayes had been saved. Justice had been served. But the cost. He looked at his father. Hadrian sat motionless, face unreadable. Then slowly the general stood, walked down from the platform, approached his son, and extended his hand. "Well done, Cadet Captain. You've made your brother proud." Garrett took his father's hand, and for the first time in 11 years, they stood together, not as general and subordinate, but as father and son. The telegram arrived on a Tuesday. Lieutenant Garrett Aldrich was in Dakota Territory when it found him. 25 years old, lean from 3 years of frontier duty. Harder than the boy who'd graduated West Point. The message was short. Father critical, heart failure, come immediately. War Department, Washington. Garrett read it twice, then folded it carefully, put it in his pocket next to a photograph he'd carried for 3 years. Hayes and him, graduation day, 1876. Two young men who'd survived their own trial. He rode for 3 days to reach the nearest telegraph station. Sent word he was coming. Rode another week to the railhead. By the time he reached Washington, his father had been unconscious for 2 days. The hospital room was quiet. General Hadrian Aldrich lay in a bed too small for a man who'd commanded thousands. 61 years old, hair white, face carved by pain and time and the weight of too many dead. Garrett sat beside him, held his father's hand, the same hand that had signed orders sending men to their deaths, that had pinned medals on the living, that had gripped his shoulder 3 years ago in a moment of understanding that came too late and not late enough. "Father, it's Garrett. I'm here." Hadrian's eyes opened, cloudy, struggling to focus. "Garrett, yes, sir. You came?" "Of course." Hadrian's grip tightened, weak but determined. "I need to tell you." "Rest, father. Save your strength." "No, listen." Garrett leaned closer. Hadrian's voice was barely a whisper. "I was wrong about everything. About Donovan, about you, about what matters." "Father, let me finish. I don't have much time." Hadrian's breathing was labored. Each word cost. "I taught Donovan that following orders was honor. He died believing it. I taught you to survive at any cost. You refused." He coughed. Blood flecked his lips. "You were right. Both times. Honor isn't obedience, it's judgment. Courage isn't survival. It's standing for something when standing costs everything." Tears ran down the old general's face. "I'm sorry I couldn't see it sooner. Sorry I tried to make you small to keep you safe. Sorry I let fear make me into stone." "You don't have to apologize." "Yes, I do, because you deserve better. Deserved a father who trusted you instead of controlling you, who believed in you instead of protecting you from yourself." Hadrian pulled Garrett closer. "Promise me something. Anything. When you have sons, let them be brave. Let them make mistakes. Let them build their own honor instead of inheriting yours." "I promise." "And tell them about their Uncle Donovan, not the hero, the brother, the boy who laughed too loud and loved too freely and died too young. Let them know him as human, not legend." "I will." Hadrian's grip loosened. His eyes closed, his breathing slowed. "I'm proud of you, Garrett. So proud. You're the man I should have been, the officer I tried to be, the son I didn't deserve. Father, I love you. I know, I've always known, I just couldn't." The sentence never finished. General Hadrian Aldrich died as the sun set over Washington, in a hospital room, holding his son's hand, finally at peace with the choices that had haunted him for 14 years. Garrett sat with him until morning. Then he stood, straightened his uniform, walked out into a world where he was alone but not lost, where his father's final lesson would guide him for the rest of his life. West Point looked exactly the same. Garrett stood on the plain watching new cadets drill. 50 years old now. Brigadier General retired, gray at the temples. Lines around his eyes from too much sun and too many hard decisions. But alive. He'd come for the dedication ceremony, a memorial to the class of 1876, to the men who'd served, who'd died, who'd built careers on the foundation of one winter when honor almost died but survived. The ceremony was in Grant Hall, the same chamber where he'd stood trial, where his father had sat in judgment, where everything had changed. Commandant Brennan was long dead. Merrick, too. Most of the officers who'd witnessed that day were gone, buried under stone markers in cemeteries across America. But the memory lived. Garrett walked through the Gothic doors. The hall was crowded, officers, cadets, families. And standing near the front, silver-haired but unmistakable, was Colonel Jonathan Hayes. They saw each other across the room. Hayes smiled, walked over, extended his hand. General Aldrich. Colonel Hayes. They shook, then embraced. Brothers in everything but blood. I didn't think you'd come, Hayes said. I wouldn't miss it. This is where it all started. This is where we almost ended. They walked together to the memorial plaque being unveiled. Bronze, mounted on the wall where the tribunal had sat. The dedication began. Speeches, recognition. The names of the class of 1876 read aloud. 50 years of service. Sacrifice. Lives lived in the shadow of that winter. Then Hayes was called to speak. He walked to the podium, looked out at the assembled crowd, took a breath. 50 years ago, I stood in this hall ready to die. Not from enemy fire, from shame, from the belief that one mistake defined me, that honor meant punishment instead of redemption. A cadet captain named Garrett Aldrich came into the darkness to bring me back. Not because it was easy, not because it advanced his career, but because he believed the honor code existed to make us better, not to destroy us. Hayes looked at Garrett. That night on the bridge, he taught me something West Point's rules never could. That mercy is part of honor. That justice includes understanding. That the code protects people, not just principles. I returned to the academy in 1877, graduated in 1879, served 35 years, taught tactics to 3 generations of officers, and every cadet who passed through my classroom heard the same lesson. Some rules must be followed absolutely, but some situations demand we remember why the rules exist, to make us human, not machines. Hayes pulled out a folder. Since 1877, I've run a program helping cadets facing financial hardship, mentoring young men who might otherwise be exploited. In 28 years, 847 cadets have participated. 200 of those officers are here today. They represent every rank from lieutenant to general. They've served in Cuba, the Philippines, Panama. They've built the modern army, and they exist because one cadet refused to let one mistake become a death sentence. The room erupted in applause. Garrett sat still, overwhelmed. 847 lives. One decision on a frozen bridge had saved one life, but that one life had saved hundreds more. The ripples never stopped, never ended, continued forward through time, like waves reaching shores no one could see. Hayes finished his speech. The plaque was unveiled. It read, "In memory of the class of 1876, who learned that honor without mercy is cruelty, that justice without understanding is vengeance, that the code exists not to punish the weak, but to protect the vulnerable from the powerful. Some principles matter more than survival, but survival matters more than pride." Garrett stood, walked to the plaque, ran his fingers over the words, thought of his father, of Donovan, of Brennan and Merrick and all the men who'd fought their own wars with conscience and duty. Thought of Hayes on the bridge, of the choice to extend his hand, of the moment when mercy had mattered more than rules. General Aldrich, a young cadet, approached, barely 18, nervous. "Sir Colonel Hayes said you were the one who saved him, who changed everything. I just made a choice." "The right choice." Garrett smiled, tired but satisfied. "The only choice I could live with. The rest is just consequence." The cadet nodded, walked away. Garrett stood alone in the empty hall. The stone walls that had witnessed everything stood silent, patient, eternal. They would stand long after he was dust, would witness 1,000 more trials, 1,000 more young men facing impossible choices. But the lesson would remain. Carved in bronze, carried in memory, passed from one generation to the next, that honor includes mercy, that justice includes understanding, that the code exists to make us human, not to turn us into machines, that sometimes the bravest thing is extending your hand into the darkness and trusting someone will take it, that survival matters, but some things matter more. Garrett walked out of Grant Hall into the afternoon sun. Behind him, the plaque caught the light, the words glowing like a promise, like a prayer, like the truth that had cost everything and saved more than anyone could count. The stone walls of West Point stood eternal, but the choices made within them echoed forever.